This is John for John's Beat. Today, I have the pleasure of being on the beat with a longtime favorite author of mine, Peter Golenbock. How are you, sir?
Just fabulous, just great.
First of all, thank you very much for your time. I've read your books for years. The Bronx Zoo, when I was a kid, I loved that book. One of my first baseball books I ever read. My friend and I would read it and talk about it all the time. Loved it. So thank you for your time, sir.
So you were a Yankee fan?
No,
No.
actually
Whoa.
not. I mean,
No.
don't tell anybody I was a Yankee hater.
No.
I'm in Chicago, love the White Sox, love the Cubs, but I was a baseball fan. And that book, back in the pre-internet days, books like yours were the only way that we could get an inside look at anything baseball. And
That's true.
my friends and I just, we devoured those books. So when you were writing those books, did that change through writing the books, I should say, did that change the way that you looked at sports or enjoyed sports?
No. I since I was about in the sixth grade, I was always looking at things from a journalist's eye. And I've always loved gossip. I loved Ball Four. I mean, Fountain's Ball Four was fabulous. The Cubs' fabulous relief pipper, Jim Brosnan, wrote two fabulous books, The Pennant Race and one of the other books that I adored. The Glory of Their Times was a big favorite of mine by Larry Ritter, because it had all those players from the teens and the 20s talking about their time in baseball. And I adored that. My career began because when I was about 13, I went to the Stamford, Connecticut Public Library and I found a book called The New York Yankees by Frank Graham. And this was a book where Ruth and Gehrig and DiMaggio talked and talked about their lives in the game. And the book was published about 1947, the one that I saw. And so when I was working for Prentice Hall as a writer-lawyer, I was moved to go down to the trade book division and with the desire to write the sequel to that book. So between 1949, 1964, 16 years, 14 pennants, 9 world championships, that was the sequel to The New York Yankees by Frank Graham, and they gave me a contract and I had a career.
And you've made a Hall of Fame type career. I mean, your books are legendary. I mentioned Bronx Zoo. I could go on and on all day. Bats with Craig Nettles, or balls with Craig Nettles, bats with Davey Johnson.
Yeah,
love them all. Has the internet, the amount of information available on the internet, has that changed the way that you go into writing a book?
No, I still do it the same way. I still use cassette tapes. Cassette tapes. I do my interviews on a landline. I do it the same way I did it 40 years ago. It works.
Why change it? Why change when you're that successful?
Exactly.
So your latest book that came out this year was Whisper of the Gods. Could you tell us a little bit about that book?
Sure. I've been interviewing players, for the last 40 years or so. Dynasty, 50 Yankee players, amazing 50 Mets players. Fenway was 50 Red Sox players. Wrigleyville was 50 Cubs players. Spirit of St. Louis, 50 Cubs and Browns players. So I've got this huge collection of interviews that I've done, and I would only use, pieces of it for those books. When I lived in Englewood, New Jersey, Jim Bouton lived 3 blocks from me, and we were like brothers. We were very, very close, and I love the guy. And about 3 years ago, he developed Alzheimer's, and last year he died. And I thought, my way of paying tribute to him, I would write a book using 18, 19, 20 of my interviews, the full interviews. And I made him the first chapter in the book and made him the last chapter. The first chapter was how this, skinny little kid from New Jersey ended up pitching for the Yankees and becoming a star in the World Series. And the last chapter was the result of what happened to him after he wrote Ball Four and after the whole world came down on his head and how terrible he felt about that. And I mixed that in with, I did an interview with Ted Williams about how he called me up one day. He said, "Golenbock, get over here." I want to tell you why Joe Jackson belongs in the Hall of Fame. So I live in St. Petersburg, Florida. He lived in Ocala. I immediately got in the car and drove over to see Ted, and he proceeded to tell me why Ted Williams belonged in the Hall of Fame. And I've interviewed Stan Musial. I interviewed Ron Santo. I interviewed Roy Campanella. Jim Brosnan was another one. And these are the interviews that fill this book of Whispers of the Gods.
Now, I assume in your lengthy career, you've interviewed hundreds, thousands, maybe even.
No, not thousands, hundreds.
Hundreds.
Yeah.
How did you narrow it down to, you said 20, I believe, in this book?
Well, I started with Hall of Famers. There are 6 or 7 of those. Monty Irvin was another one. And, others who I remembered, Rex Barney, he was the one who told me how Pee Wee Reese walked across the field and put his arm around Jackie Robinson's shoulders. And that became my book, Teammates. And now they have a statue in Brooklyn at the ballpark there of, Pee Wee Reese putting his arms around Jackie's shoulders. I picked him for a reason.
In your career, going back to when you were a kid and you were a baseball fan,
Yeah.
Did you ever imagine that, like you just said, Ted Williams called me? I mean, can you ever imagine that as a kid to say, Ted Williams is going to call me?
Well, no. I imagine as a kid, I was sure as a kid that I would replace Mickey Mantle as the center fielder for the Yankees. And then I was 13 years old playing in a baseball game, and this miserable SOB kid threw me a curveball. And at that point, I knew that I was not going to replace Mickey Mantle as the Yankee center fielder. But always I loved to write, and I love sports. And so at Dartmouth College, I was a sports editor, and I was writing as a freshman. I was writing the football varsity stories. I seemed to know what I was doing, and I enjoyed doing something where I seemed to know what I was doing. So when I was in law school, my friend, Bobby Kennedy, who was the son of J. Walter Kennedy, the NBA commissioner, he was the sports editor of the Stanford Advocate. And I made a deal with him. If he would give me credentials to the Yankees, the Mets, the Rangers, the Knicks, and so forth, I would write him on the weekends free articles. So I interviewed Joe Namath, I interviewed O.J. Simpson, I interviewed all sorts of people for the Stanford Advocate during a couple of years I was in law school. So, I wasn't overwhelmed, by interviewing these, well-known people.
See, I asked the question because, as I said, as a 10-year-old kid or however old I was, reading Bronx Zoo and all the others, like I never imagined that I'd be sitting here talking to you. It's really, really a pleasure and an honor to talk to you. You've witnessed so much and you've written so much baseball history and helped guys like me understand and love baseball. So for the generations who've read your books, I thank you for all of us.
Well, I think that's the connection that I have with you and so many of the others who read these books. And it is the love of baseball. I mean, I was blessed, as they say, with the baseball gene. It's what I've cared about, except for my wife, more than just about anything else. Yeah, she's listening into this conversation. She's thinking, well, it could be a tie, but there's something about the love of the game that's just so spectacular. And I have had the fortune to interview these people, some of them in person, some of them on the telephone, and really get to know them. It's been wonderful.
And do you have any current projects in the works? I know as an author, you probably have things rolling around in your head all the time. Is there anything that you're working on?
Yeah, I've got 3 things going right now. Only one of them is baseball, Whispers of the Gods 2. Rauman Littlefield wants Whispers of the Gods 2, which I can give them. I'm doing a book with Bobby Robustelli, I don't know if you know who Andy Robustelli was. He was a star defensive end for the New York Giants in the 50s and 60s.
Absolutely.
Writing a book about his dad, and I'm helping him do it. And back in 2016, a young woman disappeared for 22 days. And everybody thought she had been kidnapped, maybe killed. It was a national story. At the end of the 22 days, she showed up and she was beaten up. Her nose was broken. It was a terrible, terrible story. And then the police, who didn't quite believe her, spent 4 years to discover that she had made the whole story up.
Wow.
So I'm doing this book with her husband, who, when he found out she made the whole thing up, very quickly divorced her.
Wow.
So that's what this story is about. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Wow, that's an amazing one.
I know.
Are you think that will those be out next year, you think?
I would think so, yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Well, two of them will. The Whispers of the Gods book will be out 2 years.
I'm really looking forward to that. I do not have Whispers of the God yet. I am placing my order in today, though.
Very nice.
I definitely will be adding it to my bookshelf alongside the other books of yours I have. Before I let you go, tell everybody, where could they find out information? How could they order the book?
Well, you can come over to the house.
I could come over to Peter Golenbock's house?
Over to the house if you live in St. Petersburg. Or Amazon is probably the best place. I used to be able to say Barnes and Noble, but I don't even know if they're in business anymore. I suppose your local bookstore, if there are any more left, would be a good place. But Amazon, you can find so many of my books on Amazon if you search for them.
Well, that's where I'm getting mine. I'm going to Amazon. I'm checking out Whisper of the Gods. I'm going to buy it later today. Mr. Golenbock, really, I very much appreciate your time. And again, I thank you for your time. But not only that, I thank you for all the great literature. You brought me a lot closer to the game I love, and I appreciate all of it, sir.
Well, you're most kind, John. Thank you so much. I'm the one who appreciates you.
Well, you have a fantastic day, sir, and I wish you a happy holiday season.
Thank you so much. The best to you and yours as well.
Thank you.
Take care.